There. Thanks for joining us, Brian Hayes from Brussels. What's the latest tonight, Brian? There's so many rumours flying around.
Well, my understanding, Miriam, is that all of the parties are working on a new text. It's not that the text has changed in substance from the original text that was being discussed last Monday, but that it might be modified somewhat, new language introduced, a new formula some people are talking about. But as we speak, those negotiations are continuing. They have intensified in the course of the last day or so. There is some time left, but not a huge amount of time, given the fact that this time next week we will be in the middle of the summit meeting. And if the steps that have to be taken between now and next Thursday, Friday are first and foremost, were an agreement to come late this evening, tomorrow, whenever, it would require the Brexit task force under Michel Barnier to give its view to the European Commission. And the European Commission would have to come to the view that there is sufficient progress. The European Parliament sits in Strasbourg next week. The European Parliament also have a role to play in this, because we have also very clear red lines in terms of our own resolution of March of this year. And once the European Parliament says that, and the Council comes to a view this time next week, we could get a deal. So we haven't a huge amount of time to get this through, but at the same time, I think there is very positive engagement. I hear all of the sides are very keen to make this work. I think no one wants a cliff edge. Everyone wants to move from phase one to phase two. It's especially important to the Irish government and to the European Union. And I think we'll have to wait and see late into the night or tomorrow if we get a new agreement from this. But I think this is very high stakes right now. I mean, it would be a disaster for Europe, having come to the worst of the crisis, having Europe and the Eurozone especially on a positive trajectory. We really need to move on to phase two, and I think the willingness is there to do that.
The fact that they're planning so far to talk through the night must give some sign of optimism. But what you said earlier, is it the view that the regulatory alignment words would stay in, but there would just be additions like words or sentences that would reassure Arlene Foster's DUP that nothing is undermining the integrity of the UK?
Well, my understanding is that the substance of what was the Irish position, effectively the EU position last Monday, will not change, but that some additions could be put into the text which might be able to resolve the difficulties that exist on the British side. But that is first and foremost a matter for Theresa May and the British government. It's effectively a strand one issue, because Northern Ireland and the other components of the United Kingdom have to come to a view on that. So that's really an issue for Prime Minister May. But I do know that the Taoiseach in discussions with President Juncker and the European team are doing their best to resolve those difficulties, because, as the Taoiseach has said, Prime Minister May has been negotiating in good faith. We're all of the same view, that it's in all our interests in terms of trade, employment and the issues of Britain and Ireland, and moving on from this, that we get on to phase two. But I think it's too early to say at this stage how the document might change. But I'm very clear that the substance will not change, because that's an agreed matter. It's a European issue, as both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have been rightly saying. And from day one, the solidarity we have got from EU partners across the 27 has been fantastic in terms of all of the institutions. And I think it's something that the Irish people need to hear loud and clear. Europe stands with us in resolving these issues on the border question, the Good Friday Agreement, and making sure that we don't go back to the borders of the past.
And yet, Brian Hayes, if we end up with a document says that there will be regulatory alignment between the North and us in the South, and there would be no regulatory divergence between the North and the UK, how do you square that?
Well, I think in the original wording that came out following last Monday, it was quite clear in the paragraphs that the number one priority on all sides is an overarching agreement, Miriam, which will get us through this. Then, if that wasn't possible, that there would be some unique agreement for Northern Ireland by agreement. And if that agreement wasn't possible, then the question of a regulatory alignment would come into play, specifically on those issues that are currently north-south. So that is the issues that we're trying to work on. Why? They're not political issues, they're not constitutional issues. They're issues to do with practicalities for people who live in and around the border, and for the question of the North-South Ministerial Council and the bodies, and for the issue of the island as a whole. And I think that kind of bespoke commitment in terms of the last part of that paragraph that came out from last Monday is very clear to defend in a circumstance that there was no agreement. But of course, we're ambitious for that agreement. It's in our interests as Irish people that we have that agreement ultimately with the UK and that we get on to phase 2. And I hope if we come to a positive outcome on phase 1 that we can get on to that agreement.
I mean, what everyone, I suppose, is hearing tonight, we all hear the same rumours swirling around, is that the DUP as yet have not signed up to it. But can we assume if the wording, which we believe has come from London for these new additional pieces for this agreement, that they would have squared the DUP surely before they think it would be acceptable to them and the Irish government? They would have brought the DUP on board surely.
Well, I mean, that is a matter entirely for the British government and for Prime Minister May. She has a responsibility to produce a British position, and that British position will ultimately be negotiated through our interlocutors here in Brussels, i.e. Michel Barnier and his Brexit team. But as has been very clear from Dublin, from day one, the 3 priority issues on phase 1 are all together. Okay. It's not just Ireland's issue standing out. And I'd also make the point, and this was highlighted last Monday, there are some outstanding issues on the British side in terms of EU citizens' rights in the UK, which were not resolved on Monday, which I presume are now part of a package that's been worked up. So let's hope we can get there. OK, we appreciate you joining us tonight, Brian Hayes, and we all await Donald Tusk's words anyway at about 6:50 our time in the morning, whatever they are. David.